Hi, and welcome to the ECLAIR team's final presentation. Our sponsor is Jonathan Klain, ASU faculty. We have UX, UI design, front-end, back-end, and admin teams as part of this project. The purpose of this project is to allow users to manage chemical supply information with ASU laboratories. There is a need for this project as currently lab administrators are passing around Excel documents to track chemicals. We will solve the problem and lessen the logistical overhead in lab management. Our objective is to provide deliverables that will serve to make inventory access and tracking less time-consuming and more accurate for staff. We will be delivering an iOS mobile application, website access to ECLAIR inventory site, an Android application, time permitting, and we will use ASU Server to host database content.
Project requirements are mainly based around two jobs that the system is going to have to manage, those being of the lab worker and the lab manager. The lab worker, main job is going to be using chemicals in the lab. So they're going to have to add, remove chemicals. They're going to have to be able to move chemicals between labs as well. So short user story for it is worker gets chemical. They have to use the chemical using the use chemical button. And then we have some barcode functionality in there as well. So go through the chemical info. Instead of iOS, we're using a web app now. So web app will call the API, result will come back in, and they would get their confirmation. Second would be the lab manager. So the lab manager, one of their use cases is adding a new user to the ECLAIR system. So they would add in the new user info into the web app, and the login info would be sent to the new user.
So looking at the project overview, we have the system and concept as being for the ECLAIR. The aims of this project are to improve the tracking of ASU's chemical lab inventories. To achieve this, we want the ECLAIR team to accomplish implementing a user-friendly website with database functionality. We also want to provide a real-time account of inventory. That way, a user of this program can basically check real-time what the inventory is like, how many chemicals are being stored in what location, etc. And we also want to be able to create a website for users to search chemicals, their unique chemical number, location, and fire control zone. So those are just some of the kind of functionalities that we want to provide by implementing this framework.
Great, so for the information flow. First, we're going to have the users authorized through ASU. And so once you get to the home page, you'll be able to do a variety of things. You'll be able to access quick actions, which can let you do things like update chemical quantities, you can check the inventories, and then you can even save the chemical code to the chart, right? So there are going to be different ways that you can access information. You can access it by school, you can access it by the lab, right? So in each position, you're going to have actions that are specific to that location. So in a lab, you can do things like view the inventory, or you can view the fire control zone information. While if you were viewing through the school, you could look through the inventory information. You could easily access the lab management pages. And
so the timeline for this semester, in October, we were developing our team roles. We met with our sponsor in person as well as email as needed. We gathered information. We clarified and updated past use cases and the diagram layout. We completed our wireframes. We did the backend schema start. Project proposal was due on October 20th, and the Capstone requirement document was due October 25th, as well as the presentations. In November, we completed the prototype. We obtained ASU access to our server. We did user testing. We did monthly in-person meetings and sponsor tools and techniques report, as well as a summary report, which was due today. In December, we did user testing, completing input sanitation, frame for database interaction, final UX delivered, final Capstone presentation, which is this, and the link to the front and back end for beta web app.
All right, so for UX tasks, first thing that was done was wireframing. That was done in Figma. Wireframe that had to pass for each use case. Then in Figma as well, has new functionality for prototypes. So create a click-through prototype using Figma of the happy paths. There's a sitemap later on that will describe a little bit of what that prototype goes through. Running the user test has been delayed to beginning of next semester. That's already been scheduled and planned out. It got delayed because the prototype took a little bit longer than expected to go through. Once the user tests are done, there will be a bit of iteration, probably run through a second round of quick user tests. After 2 or 3 user tests, we should be good. So iteration will complete there. Some of the challenges for UX, use cases are very specific to the workings of ChemLab. So the UX is very specific to the domain that we are in. Chemicals have very specific things that need to be done, and the requirements of this app requires a lot of domain knowledge. So our source of domain knowledge, our sponsor, is not embedded in the team, so it takes quite a bit of time to send questions out to him and get questions back. Part of that is the reason for the delay on the testing.
As for the front-end tests, starting with picking suitable tools, we were looking for quite a few requirements. Flexibility comes to mind, also how it works with the backend. So for this case, we chose JavaScript React. Getting comfortable with React, that took a bit of time with the various libraries we were using, including Material UI and the navigation libraries. After that, we started creating a bunch of prototypes of wireframes and integrating REST API to interface with the backend. The approaches we took to front end is firstly, the previous team did not have any data, not as much as we wanted for the front end. So we did not use much of that. We focused on tools that are flexible, that we could change a lot, whatever happens, depending on the data we get from the back end. And we kept making tickets through Trello to make sure that throughout the whole project that we knew what task we finished, what task we have in front of us. As for the challenges, learning some libraries took some time, and there you cannot anticipate the time dumps. A lot of the prototypes are subject to change just because the backend, you're not sure how the data is going to move on. So you just create very high-end prototypes. As for the integration between libraries, some of them created some issues and had to be changed throughout time.
Great. So for the backend, we were given a server by ASU faculty, and on that server, to get it prepared, we had to do quite a few things. The first thing that we had to do is we had to get MySQL set up, and we had to prepare the schema. There were a lot of steps forward that we were able to take from the group, making just general changes to how permissions were related to users and such. But we couldn't just have the database set up. We had to have code set up that would be able to interact with it. So we created a driver written in Golang that could load the data from the databases and then normalize that information into objects. And then once we had the data inside objects, we could easily convert it into JSON. So we have this data representation of the information that's in our database in JSON format, but we need to be able to get it from the server to the client. So how do we do that? Well, we got a backend API listener set up in Golang as well. So we set up a way to listen on endpoints, query the database using the Go code, normalize that data into JSON, and then respond to it. Using that sort of information, we were able to do a lot of stuff. We were able to support bulk changes from MySQL. So for example, instead of executing individual queries against the database, we were able to upload massive amounts of information into tables. We were able to create stored procedures that would automatically query different tables and return certain amounts of information from the database. And we were able to support a changes system. So if we were to have changes on the MySQL schema on my machine, I would be able to share it with my roommates or my teammates very efficiently. So one way that we approached the backend that made us really productive is that we had team meetings that were separate from. We had team meetings that were separate, or we had backend meetings. One thing that distinguishes the back end from the front end is we had meetings that were separate from our team meetings. So we were able to share our blockers, and we were able to riff off each other and help each other out, and we were able to make architectural designs really early on that let us get a sprinting start. Another thing that we did was we created tickets for our individual issues. And not only did we create tickets, but we had 1 week sprint cycles. So those 1 week sprint cycles made sure that we were doing things week to week to week instead of just waiting 2 weeks and then doing it a couple days before. Another thing that we did that allowed us to be very efficient in the work that we did was that we worked very closely with the front end. The front end was able to give us the flow of information, and we were able to create stored procedures and format the tables in ways that would prevent us from going and reworking things later on. Additionally, we worked closely with the admin. The admin, I'll talk about them later, but they did a lot of work just working with the faculty and letting us focus on our own thing, and it was a super useful thing to have on the team. So a lot of the challenges that we ran into. So as I mentioned earlier, we were given work that was based off another team, and we were not happy with work that was done. It was written all in PHP, supported on this backend system called Vagrant, which was this really weird virtual box system that seemed unnecessary. So we just decided to just drop it all. Unfortunately, us just dropping all that work made us lose 2 weeks or so. As I mentioned earlier, the admin was able to get us that server issued, and we didn't even have to think about it. That was several weeks of coordinating back and forth. That would have put a lot of work that we were able to get done on hold. Another issue that we had was permissions with MySQL table. We were also getting in contact with ASU faculty to get that worked out, but we were able to resolve that on our own. We had issues with software versions and third-word libraries, and when we removed the old software versions to install new ones to work with the third-party libraries, we'd have to go through and hack in and find where the old locations they were installed and remove all references to them, which was tedious.
So I'm going to talk about my specific backend tasks. The first task was evaluating the existing MySQL schema that was given to us by the previous Capstone group like Ryan was talking about. Another task for myself was learning the fundamentals of the Go programming language, since it's something I'm not familiar with. Also thinking about how the database tables need to be represented within the context of the Go programming language. And lastly, starting to create a more sort procedures in Go that will basically execute relevant queries against the database. For the approaches, the communication was key. What I had to do is communicate with the front end and the administrator to stay on the same page, and also with the back end team. Also, when approaching new constructs that I wasn't familiar with, I had to use online tutorials and use my teammates and use prior knowledge to basically approach these problems. And as a team, we had assigning tickets, like Ryan was saying, and this kind of was a way to keep track of what we were doing. And for challenges, one of the challenges that we encountered as a team was just coordination. So we used Slack and Trello to manage that communication. And also, just on a personal level, I had to study the Go programming language and also learn how to use Bitbucket, since it's something that I hadn't used before.
So some of my personal tasks were to determine any additional safety and control zone considerations within a week sprint, as well as help review and update the previous work, including schema evaluation and backend code. I had to familiarize myself, just like Nick, with the Go programming language, as well as Golang and MySQL, and then I was to help create the backend queries and structures in Go. Some of the approaches that we use were mentioned before, as seen on this slide, but the major thing I want to mention is that we had an emphasis on tickets, meetings, and emails, which allowed us to have continuous communication, resolving our roadblocks very quickly, and then allowed us to ensure that we are accountable as well as making progress. Some of the major challenges that I faced were that Go updated in between, as mentioned by Ryan, which forced us to have to update some of the back-end stuff. Also, we had to communicate with IT personnel, which was time-consuming, and the previous team's work actually ended up being discarded, which was a waste of our time.
Administrative tasks. My main role has been to facilitate team collaboration and productivity. I've served as a main point of contact and team representative for the team and coordinating efforts between UTO and our sponsor. And of course, planning and scheduling the next steps and coordinating assignments for the group. Some approaches I've taken are to maintain the Google Drive team folder, use Trello project management, and Slack for primary communication. And again, as serving point of contact, it has been my pleasure to work with Jonathan Klain, our sponsor, and coordinate with the UTO office. Some challenges are coordinating the needs between the group and our external stakeholders, such as the sponsor and ASU UTO, finding consistent times to meet among the group, and to be, of course, supportive and not bossy, and of course, ensure the thoughts and efforts of the team are correctly captured via the meeting notes, which I submitted weekly.
All right, so overall group challenges, as was mentioned multiple times, building on prior work, there were a couple of weeks lost there. ASU server access was something that was also mentioned a couple of times that took quite a bit of time, but we got through it, and admin was very useful.
And finally, estimate a timeline for the next semester. In January, February, what we're going to be doing is just continuing the code iterations for both the front end and the back end. And then in March, towards the middle of the semester, we're really going to focus on integrating the front end UI with the back end services. In April, we'll focus on just wrapping it up, getting final integration done, and wrapping up with the final deliverables. So that was our presentation for the ECLAIR group. Thank you.